Hello and welcome. Today we are talking about incomplete sentences. In particular, we are talking about sentence fragments. Those are those pesky sentences that aren't complete sentences because they aren't long enough. So our objectives for today, we are going to be able to identify a complete sentence, and we will be able to identify a sentence fragment so we know how to fix it, and we will be able to make sentence fragments into complete sentences. Some of the vocabulary terms that we're going to look at today: prepositional phrase and participle phrase. Phrases are not sentences. Phrases are parts of sentences. So a prepositional phrase shows a relationship, usually where something is or when something is, position or time. So into the woods, or time would be after the party, something like that. We don't really often think that prepositional phrases are complete sentences. Every once in a while we do, but it's kind of a rare thing. This happens more often. A participle phrase kind of looks like a complete sentence because it might begin with a verb or a verbal. Actually, a participle phrase always does begin with a verbal, but it doesn't have a subject doing that verb. So walking into the woods is a participle phrase. Walking is the verbal or the participle, but there's nobody doing the walking, and that's why this would be a fragment. It's got the verb, but it does not have the subject. Some other things we're going to look at: an independent clause and a compound sentence. So a clause is like a miniature sentence because it has a subject and a verb, and it can stand alone. So here I've underlined Ed runs. Well, it's got the subject Ed, the verb runs. Over here, same thing. Amy's the subject, walks is the verb. Either of those could stand alone if they wanted to, when we could punctuate them properly. But we're putting them together, and when we put them together, of course, we're making a compound sentence. So that's two clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction or a semicolon. So in this case, we are combining them with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Later on, we're going to join one with just a semicolon, or join two clauses. So this is a compound sentence made of two independent clauses. It's important to know that both of these clauses are independent. And look, I just switched them around. And that kind of shows that they're interchangeable. That's why they're independent. Okay, now we're going to talk about dependent clauses. They cannot stand alone, and they are part of complex sentences, and complex sentences are kind of complex. They get a little tricky, and that's where we probably will run into the most problems with sentence fragments. So a dependent clause cannot stand alone, and here's an example. While the cat is away, and we know the sentence goes on from there, but just in this underlined part, just in this clause, we do have the subject, cat, and we have the verb is, not a very exciting verb, but it is the verb. The problem is the word while, and we're going to talk about that today, why that makes it a dependent clause, an incomplete thought. So a complex sentence has it contains a dependent clause, and it has two clauses altogether. It has a dependent clause and an independent clause. So here, while the cat is away is the dependent clause. It just went wrong direction. The mice will play is the independent clause. This one could stand alone because it doesn't have this word on it. So we're going to talk about these today. A complete sentence has to have a subject. That subject can be a noun or a pronoun. So cat is a noun, it, he, she is a pronoun. Those are pronouns. It's got to have a verb, or we call that the simple predicate. Maybe you heard that before. The subject has to have the verb that's conjugated to go with it. And so that can be an action, like the cat jumps, or it can just be a state of being. It can be like an equal sign. That's why I have an equal sign here, because that's what a lot of verbs do. They're called linking verbs. So the boy is the winner, he equals the winner, or you are the winner. That's a different equal sign. And so that is still a verb, and that is still a verb. They just don't have a lot of action going on. Okay, so here is a pop quiz to see what we know already. Are these sentences complete sentences? I am. In the end. Run. I'm going to see if they are complete. This one, I am. I is the subject. Am is the verb. Yeah, it's a complete sentence. So mom yells up at you, clean your room. And you yell down, I am. It's got a subject and a verb. It's a helping verb, but it still works. It's still fine. In the end, what action is being done and who's doing it? So there's not a subject, there's not a predicate or a verb. So this is a fragment. What kind of fragment is it? It is a prepositional phrase. In is the preposition, the whole thing's a prepositional phrase. Run! We have an action for sure, run. Run is the verb. You is the understood subject of this sentence. It's a command. It is an imperative sentence. So it is not a fragment. It's complete. It's good to go. So those will trip you up every once in a while. A command that is just one word long can still be a complete sentence. Phrases. A lot of times we will mistake phrases as complete sentences. And there are different kinds of phrases. We're not addressing every single kind of phrase today, but we're going to look at some common ones. Alone in the dark, that is a phrase. And dressed in black, this is a participle phrase. The problem is, in both of them, who is alone in the dark and what's happening there? Who is dressed in black and what's happening? Well, to dress is a verb, and it's in the past tense, so we could say he dressed, she dressed, but there's nobody doing the action here. So we need to probably join them to other sentences that are around them. That's probably the problem. So here, if we connect this to what comes after it, alone in the dark, comma, the creature waited, now we're okay. Alone in the dark is one big adjective describing the creature. So it's got to go right in front of the creature. And we set it off with a comma because it kind of interrupts the sentence a little bit. It's good writing, but it does interrupt, so it needs to have a comma. Now we have the man dressed in black followed the couple. Well, here, dressed in black is an adjective, just like over here. And dressed in black is modifying a noun. What noun is it modifying? It's modifying the man. So dressed in black has to be right next to the man. It could go in front. It could say dressed in black, comma, the man followed the couple. But it has to go right next to it because it is an adjective. But the important thing here is not what I just explained there. That's important, but this is a fragment. This is a fragment. They need to be fixed, and that's what we're looking at today. And if we know how to fix fragments, we'll be better off. More phrases. While parking the car and to take shelter. Well, both of these are similar. They have verbs or verbals. So parking is a verb. It's an action. Taking shelter or to take shelter is an action. This one is a participle. It's got an ing on it. This one is not a participle. It has to in front of it. So if you're taking a foreign language, you know that to plus a verb is an infinitive verb. So they're both phrases, but they're different types of phrases. So again, who's doing this action? Who's doing this action? Now we fixed them by joining them to the sentences that are around them. While parking the car, comma, she noticed the stranger. Again, this is describing she. It has to be right next to that pronoun that it's describing. The horse knows when to take shelter. This is a little different. To take shelter is not an adjective in this case. It's a little different. It is, honestly in this one, I'm not sure if it's a noun or I think it's a noun in this one. In this one below, it is definitely a noun. To take shelter is the subject of the sentence. That infinitive verb is the subject, and the verb that goes with it is would be. So they get a little tricky there. Phrases are not always adjectives. This one is acting as a noun. This one I'll figure out eventually. It'll come to me. Compound sentences. So these are probably the easier types of fragments that we're going to look at today. The bird flies, but the fish swims. They're right next to each other in the paragraph. This one's okay. It's got the subject, got the verb. It's all right. Over here, we have the subject, we have the verb, swims, but the word but is the problem. it's a conjunction. And in this case, it's a coordinating conjunction. And you might remember a fourth grade teacher, somebody telling you not to start a sentence with but or and or. That's good advice. You don't want to start a sentence with a coordinating conjunction. It just looks kind of messy. People do it all the time. I see it a lot. But it usually indicates that this sentence needs to be combined with this sentence. So we do not want to begin with that. We want to use it in the middle of the sentence. That's what we're saying here. Coordinating conjunction should combine ideas within one sentence. They should not begin sentences. So we're going to fix it by just putting them together. Notice we got to have that comma there. We make that a lowercase b, but we keep it. And now we are showing a little bit more variety in our writing by using a compound sentence. So don't be afraid to use them. They're good to use. They make our writing more interesting, but just make sure you punctuate them correctly. Okay, the coordinating conjunctions. We're in luck because there aren't that many of them. And we use them with compound sentences like the one we just saw. If you've heard this acronym before, fanboys, the most common, and I think the only ones, the only coordinated conjunctions fit in that acronym. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Those are connector words, and they're connector words that we use in compound sentences. And we use them for different reasons. So this one shows a why reason or because reason. The eagle flies for the fish swims, so the eagle is after the fish. And that's why we're using for in this case. But again, we have the comma and for. Let's look at some more. If there's not really that strong of a relationship, we just want to say that they're happening at the same time, we can use and. If they're negative, the bird doesn't fly, nor does the fish swim, then we can use the nor because they're both negative. And then here we just show a different idea of how those two ideas are connected. Same here, the duck can do either or, the duck flies or the duck swims. So you guys know instinctively when to use conjunctions, so you have it down, so you have the idea when to use them. Just remember, fanboys covers all of those, and when you are using those conjunctions, got to have a comma. Got to have that in there. Pop quiz. Compound sentence that has a coordinating conjunction must have I just said it. That's right, must have a comma. And then we have the example. However, there are compound sentences that do not have coordinating conjunctions. There are exceptions to that. So sometimes we put them together with a semicolon. This is a semicolon. It's the comma and the colon put together. The bird flies, semicolon, the fish swims. Or we could just have two different sentences. That's totally fine. There are reasons that we might use this style. Maybe in a poem, we want to just be streamlined. Notice here we do not have a coordinating conjunction and, but, or. We don't want to use a coordinating conjunction with a semicolon. We don't want to connect them. We don't have a problem here with a sentence fragment going on at all. So we've strayed a little bit from that. I just want to show that a compound sentence can be joined with a semicolon. They're both good. Okay, now we're talking about complex sentences. And the first type of complex sentence we're going to look at is the one that has an adverbial clause. You may not totally know what an adverbial clause is. That's okay. What we're looking at today is sentence fragments, how to make them complete sentences, and what words to look for. What are some of the clues? And then later we'll jump into really why is it an adverb clause. Today we're not going to harp on that. When the dog barks, the cat meows. They're right next to each other in the paragraph. The dog barks could be a complete sentence. It's got the subject, dog. It's got the verb, the predicate, barks. The word when is what makes it incomplete. So it's a little ironic. We think of fragments as being too short to be sentences. Well, actually, we added a word, when, and now it's too long to be a complete sentence. Or it makes it a dependent clause. This clause is now dependent on this independent clause. This one can stand alone. So we're going to fix them when the dog barks, the cat meows. It's very nearly where it needs to be. We're close. But the problem is punctuation needs to be a comma. When we begin a sentence with when, we're going to have to look for the pause. It's going to go right there and put a comma there. When the dog barks, comma, the cat meows. And we're good. There's some other words that we need to look for. When is just one of them. There are more that we need to be aware of. What can you think of that would also complete that sentence? Blank, the dog barks, the cat meows. There are quite a number of words that could fit in there. A sentence might be kind of silly, but they would make sense. Here are some. When, if, because, after, before, although, while. So, if the dog barks, the cat meows. Because the dog barks, the cat meows. After, before the dog barks, the cat meows. The cat has ESP and it knows when the dog is going to bark. Whatever the reason, whatever the relationship, we would use these words. These words are called coordinating. No, scratch that from your mind completely. They are subordinating conjunctions. They're different from the coordinating conjunctions. They're similar, but they're a little different. And there are more of them. Not like fanboys that had a limited amount. Here we have more words. Okay. We can reverse them. The cat meows, comma, when the dog barks. And it means the same thing. It really doesn't change the idea very much, but there's an issue with it. So there is a problem. That's right, we don't need the comma. When we have the dependent clause, the adverbial clause, in the second part of the sentence, we don't need a comma. And let's see, is there another example of that? Here it is corrected. Okay. Another one that often happens is because. A lot of times we are tempted to put a comma before because. The cat meows, comma, because the dog. We don't want a comma before or after because. Same with when, same with if, same with although, but it happens very often with because. Moving on to noun clauses. I don't see these as fragments very often, so we're not going to spend as much time on them. What you eat is a noun clause. Has the subject, you, has the predicate, verb, eat. So we have the makings for a sentence, and again, the word what is what makes it an incomplete thought. And it is a relative pronoun. We're not going to spend a lot of time on relative pronouns today, but it's one of those keywords we need to look for to indicate that we might have a fragment. How do we fix it? Well, we probably need to combine it with sentences that are around it. You are what you eat. Okay, you are, in this case, is the independent clause. It can stand alone. You is the subject, are is the verb. This clause, the noun clause, is functioning as a noun. You are this noun. I could say you are banana. Banana's a noun. But we're making this the noun. That's why it's a noun clause. Okay, if you don't know what noun clauses, adverb clauses, again, don't stress about it. Just kind of be aware that this could be a fragment. Again, it doesn't happen very often. Adjective clauses very often are palmed off as complete sentences when they are fragments. So this is a little more important. Who owns the restaurant? This one is tricky because it could be a complete sentence if we wanted it to be. It's just punctuated wrong. That should be a question mark, and then we have a question. Who owns the restaurant is a complete sentence. It's interrogative. However, the writer of the sentence isn't trying to ask a question. In the flow of the paragraph, it is not interrogative. So in the context, it means something else. And here it is in context. I know the woman who owns the restaurant. So I think we know what's going to happen. This is going to be the independent clause. It can stand alone. I know the woman is a complete sentence. But who owns the restaurant, because of where it is, because of the context, it is a dependent clause, and it's an adjective clause too. So it's pretty easy to fix. We are just going to join them together. There's not a comma in this case because who owns the restaurant is an essential clause. We'll talk about that another time, But in this case, there is no comma. Sometimes we do set off the adjective clause with a comma or a pair of commas. In this case, we're not going to. Okay, in the independent clause, I is the subject, no is the verb, woman is the direct object, and then our adjective clause is describing a noun or a pronoun. What is it describing? What does it do? It describes a noun or a pronoun. And it is describing woman. That is the word being described. That's why it goes right after the word woman. If it went somewhere else in the sentence, it would be in the wrong place, but it's got to go right after her. Okay, we covered several types of sentence fragments today, and we are able to identify a complete sentence. It has to have a subject and it has to have a verb, and we would add to that, it has to be a complete thought, it has to stand alone. And so now we know what a fragment is. It's where it doesn't hit all three, it doesn't have a subject, doesn't have a verb, or it doesn't stand alone. And now we know how to fix them. Usually by looking at the sentences around the fragment, we know how to fix a fragment. Usually just have to join it to something else. Okay, types of fragments that we saw. Sometimes phrases, driving a car, to drive a car. This one's a participle, this one is an infinitive phrase. And compound sentences, where we put two independent clauses together. Again, this is a coordinated conjunction. Fanboys is the acronym to help us remember what all of the coordinated conjunctions are. So this could not stand alone, but if we put them together, it can. And complex sentences, very similar, a little bit different. This is the word that makes this phrase, while Amy jogs, a fragment. So we got to join it to the independent clause, Ed walks. Or we can have an adjective clause. Amy is the girl who jogs, so who jogs is the adjective describing the girl. So we know that both of these sentences have an dependent clause and an independent clause. Left out the noun clause, that's okay, we don't see those as often. All right, that is all we have for today, sentence fragments. It's a lot of information. Let me know if you have any questions. Next lesson, you guessed it, is going to be also about incomplete sentences, but it's going to be about run-ons and comma splices. Run-ons and comma splices next time.